Rob Hall, a mountaineering guide from New Zealand, had summited Mount Everest 5 times. He was one of the most talented expedition organizers. In May 1996, he died in a blizzard high on Everest in the death zone after stranded for more than 20 hours. This is his story. Rob Hall was born in Christchurch, New Zealand in January 1961. He was the youngest of 9 children in a family of modest means. Perhaps because of that background, initiative, enterprise, and self-reliance characterized his life from an early age. He was destined for adventure. The proximity of the Southern Alps sparked his interest in mountaineering. After leaving school early, he found employment as a designer and manager with various manufacturers of outdoor clothing and climbing gear. Hall first visited the Himalayas in 1980, where he climbed Amardabalam in the Sherpa region of Nepal. It was his first Himalayan summit. In 1981, he climbed another 6,000 meters Himalayan peak. However, he earned widespread recognition in June 1981 when he made the first winter ascent of the steep Caroline pass of Mount Cook with steep glacier. For 3 years, Hall combined his gear manufacturing work with summer season as a guide and rescue team leader for the New Zealand Antarctic Research Program. He formed a climbing partnership with fellow New Zealander Gary Ball. He returned to the Himalayas in 1987, where he had several attempts on Annapurna, K2, and Everest, mainly with his climbing partner Gary Ball. Gary and Hall, after several attempts, reached the summit of Mount Everest for the first time in 1990. They were leading a group of climbers which included Edmund Hillary's sons, Peter Hillary, who relayed the news over the radio to listeners in New Zealand. Inspired by their success, Rob and Gary put their skills into raising sponsorships for a global tour to scale all the world's 7 highest continental summits in the shortest time span possible. Over the next 7 months, their sincere attempts bore fruit as they were successful in climbing Mount Everest, Denali, Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, Aconcagua, Kosciuszko, and Vinson Massif. They completed the 7 summit speed in record time, starting with Everest in May 1990 and finishing with Vinson Massif in Antarctica on 12 December. They became household names in New Zealand. Their venture also made a profit which they used to set up an international mountain guiding business, Hall and Ball Adventure Consultants, in Christchurch in 1991. Their firm organized climbing expeditions for paying clients. The company quickly built up a base of loyal clients with a remarkable success rate on the world's most prestigious peaks, particularly Everest. In 1992, Hall and Ball successfully led commercial expeditions to Everest, Aconcagua, and Vinson Massif. They had requested another fellow countryman, Guy Cutter, an accomplished climber who was employed with the military, to provide his support for their debut commercial trip. The 1992 expedition to Everest was thoroughly successful as the team comprising Hall, Gary, Carter, 4 Sherpas, and 6 clients all reached the summit. In 1993, Rob Hall, Gary Ball, and Guy Cutter teamed up again for taking a team of 7 to summit Everest. Rob Hall's wife, Jane Arnold, also accompanied him on that trip, making them the 3rd couple to climb Everest. Gerhard Schmerz and Hannelore Schmerz of West Germany were the first couple to summit Everest in October 1979. You can watch a video of their story on my channel. The year ended on a disastrous note for Hall as he was devastated by the loss of his climbing partner Gary Ball, who died of pulmonary edema on Dhaulagiri. The tragedy probably influenced his decision to use supplementary oxygen on the highest peaks in his future expeditions. Though he was overcome with grief at the unexpected death of Gary, he continued with organizing expeditions under the banner of Adventure Consultants. The prefix Hall in Ball was dropped. Trips to Vinson Massif in Antarctica became regular, conducted once in a year. Hall led another successful Everest expedition in 1994. That year turned out to be the most eventful and prospective for him and his firm, as all the clients who signed up for the third trip to Everest reached the summit. Rob Hall, along with Ed Wisters, a high-altitude climber from Seattle, whom he had contracted in place of Guy Carter, embarked on a mission to climb Lhotse shortly after their descent from Everest. Hall climbed the notoriously risky K2 on his fourth attempt in 1994. That same year, he led successful expedition to Carsten Pyramid and Choyo. In 1995, Hall, Carter, and Westers joined hands for the Everest expedition. The expedition was marred by heavy snowing, leading to delays and ultimately forced the team to turn back. Only one climber, Lobsang Jangbo, made it to the peak. At the south summit, Rob Hall turned his clients back because of time constraints and excessive snow. Despite fees from his clients, he insisted that it was too late in the day to continue safely. He also felt compelled to help the French climber Chantal Maudet, who was suffering from cerebral edema, even though he was not directly responsible for her. That same year, Rob, Gustafsson, and Westers teamed up to climb Makalu, the world's fifth highest mountain. Hall also used the logistic base in the acclimatization from commercial expedition to support his own ambitions. In one 14-month period, he reached the summits of 5 of the world's 6 highest peaks, concluding with Makalu in October 1995. Afterwards, he wrote, "Fortune had smiled on me. I gazed across to Everest, where we had stood on the south summit just 11 days before. What a fantastic planet we live on, and how privileged I am to journey across its mountains." As both Carter and Ed Wisters were unavailable for the Adventure Consultants' 1996 Everest expedition, Rob signed off Australian Mike Groom and New Zealand guide Andy Harris to work alongside him on the mountain that year. The expedition consisted of 8 paying clients and 3 guides. The clients were Doug Hansen, John Krakauer, Beck Weathers, Lou Kasishki, all 4 from the US, Yasuko Namba from Japan, Dr. Stuart Hutchison from Canada, Frank Pishbeck from Hong Kong, and Dr. John Tosk from Australia. There were 3 guides: Rob Hall, leader and head guide from New Zealand, Mike Groom from Australia, and Andy Harris from New Zealand. In addition, there were more than a dozen people: Sherpas, base camp manager, expedition doctor, cook, etc., who were assisting the expedition. Among the clients was John Krakauer, a journalist on assignment from Outside magazine. Hall had brokered a deal with Outside for guiding one of their writers to the summit, in exchange for advertising space and a story about the growing popularity of commercial expedition to Everest. Months before, Jane Arnold had to cancel her plans to join the expedition when she discovered she was pregnant. She was an avid climber too and had summited Everest with Hall in 1983. Hall's Everest expedition proceeded without incident until the afternoon of May 10. Shortly after midnight on May 10, the expedition began the summit push from Camp 4 atop the South Col. They were joined by three other parties, Scott Pesher's Mountain Madness, as well as parties from Taiwan and India. The number of climbers who were present on that day was an issue itself for their safety. As the climbers from three expeditions attempted to reach the summit, they quickly encountered a series of problems and delays. Upon reaching the Hillary Strip, the climbers discovered that no pack ropes had been placed, and they were forced to wait for an hour while the guides installed the ropes. Things began to go seriously wrong. With a large number of climbers on the move at the same time, and Hall and Fisher had asked their client to stay within 150 meters of each other, there were bottlenecks at the single fixed line at the Hillary Strip. As crucial time spent on laying new roofs, the tight scheduling for the climb began to slip. Many of the climbers had not yet reached the summit by 2 p.m. Reaching the summit by 2 p.m. ensured that there was enough time to make it back to Camp 4 before it got dark. At 3 p.m., with climbers still climbing far below, Hall, Sardar, Ang Dorje, and other climbing Sherpas who had been waiting at the top began their descent from the summit. On the way down, Ang Dorje came across Doug Henson from Hall's party above the Hillary Strip. Dorje ordered him to descend, but he refused. Exactly 1 year earlier, Hall had turned Henson around the south summit at 2:30 p.m. due to time constraints and bad weather. Henson told John Krakauer that he had returned to Everest in 1996 largely as a result of Hall's advocacy. Rob called him from New Zealand, urging him to give it another shot, and this time Doug was determined to back the top. Some speculated that this earlier failed attempt may have led Hall to disregard a timetable for safe descent that he himself had previously set. Henson was allowed to summit, but shortly thereafter he was overcome by fatigue. Scott Fisher reached the summit at around 3:40 p.m. on the afternoon of May 10. His Sardar, Lop Singh Jangbu Sherpa, was waiting for him at the top. Around this time, Makalu Gao and two Sherpas of the Taiwanese team arrived at the summit. Rob Hall was also there, waiting for Doug Henson to arrive as the weather was turning bad. Around 4 p.m., Henson finally appeared, moving up painfully slowly. Hall hurried down to help him the final 40 feet to the summit. Both stayed only a minute or two at the summit and then turned to begin the long descent. 100 meters down the summit, Henson ran out of supplemental oxygen. He and Hall had been on the mountain an hour longer than planned. Hall sent his Sherpas down to assist the other clients and stated that he would remain to help Henson. Although he knew that it could prove fatal, he made the brave decision to stay with Henson. Doug Hansen had expended every last bit of his strength to reach the summit. Now there was nothing left in reserve to make it back to Camp 4. At 4:30 p.m., Hall got on the radio to say that he and Hansen were in trouble high on the summit ridge and urgently needed oxygen. Hall remained with Hansen and tried to bring the nearly helpless climb down without gas. But when they got to the top of the Hillary step, he couldn't get Hansen down the 40-foot vertical drop. Around 5 p.m., a blizzard struck the southwest base of Everest, dropping visibility and obliterating the trail back to Camp 4 at South Goal. Shortly afterward, Hall radioed for help, saying that Hansen had fallen unconscious but was still alive. At 5:30 p.m., Guide Andy Harris began climbing to the Hillary step with water and supplemental oxygen. At the time, Guy Cutter, climbing partner of both Hall and Harris, was guiding an expedition on Mount Famuri, a few miles from Everest Base Camp. He had been monitoring Hall's radio transmissions throughout the day. He grew very alarmed. At 4:53 p.m., he got on the radio and strongly urged Hall to descend to the south summit and get some gas. Carter knew Hall wasn't going to be able to do anything for Dog without it. Prop said he could get himself down, but not with Dog. About an hour later, Hall was still with Hansen atop the Hillary step, going nowhere. Carter implored his mate again to leave Hansen and come down alone because it was obvious that leaving him was his only choice. Hall chose not to desert his client in the storm and remain with him. Hall found it impossible to get Hansen down the face of the steep Hillary step and refused to leave him there alone. Sometime later, he finally descended alone to the south summit, but at this point, neither Doug Hansen nor Andy Harris, who had risked his life to go to their rescue, were with him anymore. No one is certain what happened to Doug that evening, but it has been conjectured that he lost his footing as Rob struggled to coax him down the mountain and fell 7,000 feet to his death. His ice axe was later found jammed into the ridge, above the sheer pass down which he is speculated to have fallen. Doug Hansen finally achieved his dream of climbing Mount Everest, but at the cost of his life. On May 11 at 4:43 a.m., close to 12 hours after the blizzard started, Hall radioed down and said that he was on the south summit. He was not breathing bottled oxygen because his regulator was too choked with ice. By 9 a.m., Hall had fixed his oxygen mask, but indicated that his frostbitten hands and feet were making it difficult to traverse the packed troops. Later in the afternoon, he radioed to base camp, asking them to call his wife, Jane Arnold, on the satellite phone. During this last communication, he reassured her that he was reasonably comfortable and told her, "Sleep well, my sweetheart. Please don't worry too much." He died shortly thereafter of exposure. Attempts to make radio contact with Hall later that night and the next day went unanswered. 12 days later, when David Brecious and advisors from the IMAX expedition climbed over the south summit on their way to the top, they found Hall lying on his right side in a shallow ice hollow, his upper body buried beneath a drift of snow. In all, 8 climbers perished in the storm high on Everest. Rob Hall, Andy Harris, Doug Hansen, Yasuku Namba, Scott Fisher, Sewang Faljor, Dorje Morov, and Sewang Smanla never made it back. Rob Hall, though essential to everyone during the climb, didn't adhere to his own turnaround time for the summit. He was hours behind the turnaround time and waited for Doug Hansen. He had convinced him to make another go at the summit. As a result, they became stranded high in the dead zone. Hall's loyalty was fierce. He refused to leave Hansen and tried to protect him until the very end. In 1987, a Polish climber was stranded high on the Tibetan side of Everest after an avalanche accident. When Hall and Ball got to know, they hired a truck in Kathmandu, drove over the Himalaya into Tibet and rescued the fall. With the passing of Rob Hall, New Zealand lost its most talented expedition organizer and a particularly energetic, successful professional climber. Rob's skills in many fields were recognized well beyond the international mountain fraternity in which he was best known. He was awarded by the US Navy for rescue services in Antarctica, the Himalayan Rescue Association for the rescue of a stranded Himalayan climber from Lola and Everest, the New Zealand government in 1990 for completing the 7 summits in 7 months, and in 1994, the MBE for services to mountaineering. 2 months after Rob Hall died, Jane gave birth to Sarah, a name they had both figured out together. Sarah Arnold Hall and Jane still live in New Zealand. Jane remarried in 2002 and had another daughter with her second husband. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, please leave a like and a comment below. If you want to watch more content like this in the future, please consider subscribing to the channel.